Well, the next item is the district calendar update for 2017-2018. Dr. Pilch, a little lead into this for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
Very briefly, annually we bring to you a recommendation for the district calendar for the preceding, or the following year, the next year. Anyway, we bring you, and as a board, one of your obligations is to approve the district calendar. That's one of the jobs spelled out that you must comply with in board policy. And so we have a committee that's been working on some recommendations around a calendar. I've got Mrs. Annette Overton here, who's our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, to open this up, and then I think she'll ask Patricia Otto and Robert Hepperly to join her as well, as they co-chaired the committee.
Thank you, Dr. Pilch. President DeWitt and members of the board, thank you for having us here tonight to share the information and around the calendar committee that we've been working on in the last 2 months. I'm here to bring you the draft of the calendar and talk about the committee. And the committee is consists of community members, classified and teachers, staff, and district administrators and parent representatives that are all on there bringing their knowledge and their information from the team. The committee met 2 times this year and had a lively, in the last 2 months, and had a lively discussion around the changes that you see on the proposed calendar. They're excited this year to take suggestions from people in their groups and that they represent, and offering shifts in the calendar like in spring break. You'll see that. Right now, I'd like to invite our 2 co-chairs up and thank them publicly for the work that they did. Both of them brought all kinds of information, invited people, recruited people to be part of our committee, and so I would invite both of them to come up and share their information with you and answer any questions that you may have. Robert Hepperly is a Director of Human Resources, and Pat Otto is our Greeley Education Association President. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. President DeWitt, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to bring this proposal to you guys tonight. Like Annette said, we started a few months ago, back in October, on this work. Our committee got together and we really just started with a blank slate calendar and started to kind of build that framework of, putting in holidays and looking at the CHASA calendar and board policies and master contracts policies and those kind of things to kind of start with that framework. Then we took that work out to our representative groups, to parents, to teachers, to staff, to get some input, and then we came back again at the end of October to build this calendar for you. And this is the proposal that we came up with. It's very similar to calendars in the past. This current calendar and the year before, it's very similar if you were to compare the two. Really the only difference is spring break. Some of the feedback we heard was, how come the district spring break is not aligned with UNC spring break? And so we made that change this year. We had some flexibility there with spring break this year, we thought, and so we added that to the calendar as a proposal. We've, families that have students in the district and at UNC were never allowed to take spring break at the same time, or it was difficult, or staff that had, spouses, or, our student teachers and those relationships we have with UNC. So we just thought aligning that was a good change, and so that's the big change for this year. Like I said, otherwise it's very similar to calendars in years past. But I'd be happy to answer any questions about the calendar or the process.
Mr. Hafley.
I want to thank all of you for your hard work, because I know how challenging this is, and you all deserve incredible credit. Last week I happened to be in buildings quite a lot on Monday and Tuesday, and I'll bet you at least a dozen times I was asked, why don't we have the entire week of Thanksgiving off? And I told them that there are unintended consequences that I'm unaware of, and that they need to go through both of you to do that in the future. So I am passing on what I heard when I was in the buildings last week, and I do not need a response. I am just sharing that information.
Thanks.
Is that don't blame the messenger? Is that what you're saying, sir?
Much.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hall.
I want to thank you for your work on this. I know it's not an easy thing when you gather people together. But I've got a couple questions I'm going to ask, because I was expecting a different calendar after what we talked, and we discussed this basically last year, of putting it together as a 2-year calendar and not just a 1-year calendar for numerous reasons. So I was a bit disappointed to see this one-year calendar. So can you help me out? Why?
So we talked about that a little bit in our second session of, because now we're starting to see a trend of the calendars being very similar year to year, that maybe now's the time to start to look at a 2-year calendar.
So if it's similar, why don't we go ahead and make it?
Discussion 2 was around, we shifted spring break pretty significantly for next year. And so wrapping heads around that big shift was part of our discussion 2, that do we do this first and then tackle a 2-year calendar? It's not to say we can't come back in the spring, this coming spring, and start working on a second year. But right now, the committee just kind of felt like that with that big shift in spring break and a few other little tweaks to the calendar, that we weren't quite ready to make that leap yet.
One more question. We can always, if spring break change that's made, we could always change the second year back. Because this brings a lot of things to the table as a 2-year that are huge, and that this doesn't. So I would really appreciate it, and I would put it out for consideration of the board, that this goes back to committee to look at it very strongly, to implement a 2-year, see what we could do before we accept this one. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you. Dr. Richard?
So I had a question about, and tell me if I'm getting the numbers wrong, first semester being 82 days with students and second semester being 92 days for students. Is that the split that we've typically had?
That's been the typical split, and a lot of it is because second semester with all the testing, the state testing, that we lose instructional days second semester that we don't lose first semester. So typically, second semester is a few days longer to accommodate all the testing windows.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Other comments from the board? Well, Dr. Pilch, I was just going to follow up, so go right ahead.
Well, so before we wrap up, I guess I would just like to hear if there's other interest among the board at looking at a 2-year calendar, or if Mr. Hall stands alone.
Yeah.
With me, I have to admit, Mr. Hall, I was interested in a 2-year calendar. So you're standing with me as you stand alone.
Well, my little follow-up was that I would too very much like to see a 2-year calendar, and I don't, since I'm not working on the committee, it's easy for me to say, could you please look at a second and throw it together and maybe entertain from your colleagues as you do this, what bad things might happen if we did this 2-year calendar. But I've been in this discussion a couple of times now, and it always seemed like maybe just around the corner, we're going to try to implement 2 in a year, or 2 in a row, and it might be time to just give that a shot. Again, I'm not putting in the sweat equity, but I'd appreciate any effort that the committee could invest in that path. Mr. Hafley.
Here. I'm nothing but a country boy,
Well,
and I'm kind of curious as to the pros and cons of a 1 versus 2-year calendar, please.
sure, educate us.
Somebody,
We'd be
please.
delighted to have maybe you're asking for that to come later. I don't think we're prepared to necessarily do a pro and
And I
con tonight.
don't know.
Yeah, so bring,
One thing we have to think about is that for the 2-year, there will most likely be tweaks in the second-year calendar that we may not be able to foresee or plan ahead. So just knowing that we could create a 2-year calendar, but knowing that as year 2 comes around, there will have to be tweaks and adjustments to the calendar anyway.
And I can add to it that other school districts that have done 2-year calendars will have one that's approved and official for the next year. And then what they'll do is come back and do a tentative agreement, so that if there are any tweaks that need to be made, as Pat suggested, there are any tweaks that you could make those suggestions or those changes in that year. So we would start with a 2, That would be the work that this committee would do this year, have 2. Then next year, we would come in with you tweaking if there were anything that needed to be making any adjustments in the calendar for the following year. So it would already be approved or tentatively set in place and in motion. You could just make adjustments if necessary. Then from that point, we would begin to do another year, and then we would always have a 2-year in session, or on the webpage, approved by you, and then we could just make adjustments as necessary. Does that help? Okay.
Well, it certainly points out the function and the possibility. Dr. Richard has a comment or question.
Oh, just a question is, who are we hearing from that is interested in a 2-year calendar? Are we hearing that from teachers? Are we hearing that from parents?
It's primarily parents, it's primarily families, so that they can make longer-term plans about, when we're going to start school back. So right now, we don't have the start date for school next August, because this is when we start to approve the calendar for next year. So it's mostly families, and it's about long-term planning. And honestly, it's any of us who are working with calendars and trying to coordinate things around calendars, longer-term planning.
And the folks that came to talk to me about it, or that at least addressed it with me, were teachers that were taking classes at UNC and that were finding that they were challenged with spring break issues, with having to be on campus while they were off for regular spring break with the district, but then they were on with UNC and vice versa. So those were people that said, has there ever been a consideration for that? And then additionally, student teachers said the same thing. Not all student teachers, but a few of them brought it up and said, has there ever been a time when you would do that? And, they're only student teaching 1 semester, so it wasn't that big of a deal for them, but for future student teachers, so.
Well, those are our calm and kind words to send back to the hardworking committee. And we do appreciate you hearing us, and maybe you can give us some feedback in the weeks ahead.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, the next item, Dr. Pilch, is revision to policy BE, school board meetings. And this is a motion. This is an action item which will require a motion at this time.
I move that the Board of Education of Weld County School District 6 approve the revisions to policy BE, school board meetings as presented.
Second.
Dr. Pilch?
So this is the policy that would allow us to begin starting our business meeting at 6 p.m. in lieu of our current 7 p.m. start time. The other piece that is added in here that is new is this information around notification by electronic mail, as long as the board member agrees. And so with email being the current way that we notify board members and send information out to board members now, we no longer photocopy the whole package and hand deliver it to you all. We felt like we should add that language to this policy as well. But this is the policy that would have all these folks sitting in the office. Look at Brad Johnson rubbing his eyes. It's his bed. It's well past his bedtime. This is the policy that would hopefully get people out of here a little earlier if we start with our board meetings at 6 p.m. And I think we thought we would start with our January board meetings.
I'd be glad to hear any comments. Dr. Richard, you don't even need that button. Go right ahead.
Just a quick cleanup. I don't have any problem with the policy, but a quick cleanup by email or WAVES, W-A-I-V-E-S.
Yeah, that's embarrassing.
Oh, message in a bottle.
Oh, I get that. Yeah, that's what that was.
Well, electronic waves.
Yeah.
X-Wave. There ought to be an award for discovery of these things. Thank you for that. Other comments or questions from board members? This does not mean then that we will all wax poetic and speak longer into the night, right? It isn't because.
I sure hope not.
Okay, that's not our plan. All right, well, it's been moved and seconded to make that change beginning in January of 2017. Roll call, Ms. Richards?
Mr. DeWitt?
Aye.
Mr. Hafley?
Aye.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Lydiak?
Aye.
Ms. Pappas?
Aye.
Dr. Richard?
Aye.
Mrs. Solis?
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Well, thank you very much. And Ms. Richards, thank you very much for pitch hitting for us this evening. Appreciate your time and your effort. Bernie, drop by. And this is the conclusion of our meeting tonight. This meeting is adjourned.